My guest today is a scientist, a nutritionist, and an emotional and binge eating specialist who works with women who have been on the yo yo dieting roller coaster for years. Having started his career in the field of nutritional epigenetics and spending many years working in hospitals as part of the research team, he developed the core belief that the vast majority of disease and illness is not due to bad luck or genetic predisposition, but as a result of poor nutrition and lifestyle choices. That for most people lead to weight gain, low self worth, and self sabotaging behavioral patterns. His extensive experience allowed him to uncover the deeper challenge people have with health, which isn't about calories or kale, but in fact, it's about mindset and behavior change. The people he works with know what they need to do. They know how to do it, but they're just not doing it, and they don't know why. Sounds familiar, right? It definitely resonates with me. Having been on his own personal development journey, my guest is now super passionate about showing people how to level up their health so that healthy habits and the best food choices are easy and natural, not through force or willpower, but through transformation. We talk about the eating behaviors that sabotage your wellness goals, how body positivity is not actually a good thing, and ways in which we can put an end to making lifestyle choices that hinder our progress and put us back on a path to wellness. Enjoy the episode. Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining another episode of the Skin I'm In podcast. I'm your host, Chanel, and this is a place where women can tune in to gain peace through clarity, purpose through inspiration, and the permission to be themselves through the stories of other women. If you're enjoying these episodes so far, click the like, share, and subscribe button so that more women like you can be positively impacted by the stories in this podcast. Welcome to the Skin I'm In podcast, Matty. How are you?
Chanel, what's going on? Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation, which we've been talking about for a little while.
I know. And before we get started, I want to say first and foremost, the Skin I'm In podcast has hit a new milestone today. You are the first male guest on the show. Congratulations. Very excited. And I mean, when I came across your profile, it was someone who referred you to me through like a Facebook group that I am. And I thought to myself, how interesting that there is a man out there who helps women with their emotional eating. And I was like,
bizarre.
I need to know more about this. So how did you get to be on this path?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, well, originally I started as a scientist working in a cancer hospital. And I mean, even before that, I sort of grew up with my mum as a nurse and I was in the countryside and believed that science and medicine was sort of the be all and end all of human intelligence. And so, yeah, grew up, got into science, went and studied. And then I worked for multiple different groups, I guess, along my career. I started working with elite athletes and sort of rich colleges in Australia and universities that had sports teams and doing really hyper personalized nutrition. And I was doing that though from a molecular biology standpoint, so it was still the science side of things. And then that contract finished up, and then my next job was at a cancer hospital, and I ended up working there for 7 years. And I guess over the course of that journey, I was young and naive and interested in, seeing people get healthy and well. And it wasn't until that I worked in a hospital that I started to see that nobody really gets well. And what I mean by that is not that people don't heal and recover, but the system that guides them to get well isn't really guiding them in the right direction, or at least it's taking a really long pathway to get to the outcome. And that pathway is often medication for very long periods of time. And I'm talking in a chronic disease setting as well. Obviously, medications for emergency medicine and devastating infections, super important. But in this disease environment that I was in, cancer, and then, I guess second to that, diabetes, Alzheimer's, all those modern chronic diseases, is that no one was talking about the cause of disease in any of the meetings that I was ever in about cancer. No one was talking about their diets. No one was talking about the chemicals under the kitchen sink or in their makeup or, whatever it might be, the fluoride in the water, the air we breathe and the brake dust that we breathe in that causes cancer. No one was ever talking about how to change the what caused it piece of the puzzle. And so for me, what I realized is that pretty much all the cancer patients that were a part of what we were doing, or were at the front end of their cancer journey or their chemo or radiation journey, they were overweight visibly, like to me, just to look at them. And I was, going through clinic every single day, and it was very obvious that these people were overweight. And then studies came out which told us that, about 80 to 88% of people that have cancer, the precursor to that for them is going to be not diabetes, but I guess pre-diabetes and obesity. And so then I was like, oh, I should just become a nutritionist, because then I'll stop everybody getting cancer, right? It's that easy. It's like 80%
Yeah.
of people just have to change what they eat. And so I started talking to people about what to eat and saying, oh, you need to eat this and this, and which is very different to the, the food guidelines or the food pyramid, because there's a whole rabbit hole conversation about, how
Yeah.
that's funded. But yeah, telling people to prioritize their protein and, eat the right vegetables and clean their food rather than have it covered in pesticides and all this kind of stuff. But still, most people would be like, amazing, and then go home and still eat the diet that they used to eat when, they were overweight or unwell, or they'd only do it for a temporary period of time, like while they were sick, and then when they weren't sick, they were like, great, I can go back to who I was before. And I was like, hang on, the person you were before produced overweight, obesity, cancer, insert disease. Why would you go back to that? And that's how I started to see the cancer hospital. Is like the front door was a revolving door. It's like, come here, we'll get you better in theory, and then we're going to send you back to the life that caused the cancer. And that really just didn't sit right with me. And so after realizing that pretty much everybody knew what healthy food was, because I'd sit in front of them and say, hey, what's your diet like? And they'd say, oh, Matty, it could be better. I was like, if everybody knows it could be better, then they know what a healthy diet roughly should be. Diet template aside, it's like, sure that we could argue about the nuances of vegetarianism versus omnivore versus carnivore, but most people know meat, veggies, good for you, right? Chocolate for breakfast, not ideal. And that's about all you need to know to achieve about 70% of results. But that's where I took the step into behavior change and psychology and emotional healing, because I realized that even with the knowledge and the guidance and the accountability, people were still not following through, even in the face of like devastating diagnoses. And so I was like, why? It's so easy. Just follow these rules. And then I realized on this journey that, the decisions we make and the choices we make are not about facts and science. They're about our inner belief systems and how we feel about ourselves and trauma and all of those kind of things. And so that's when I took the next step into the world of emotional binge and overeating, because I think for most of us in this privileged, abundant, excessive Western world, the real work is there. Because if science and facts worked, nobody would ever need emotional healing ever.
Amen to that. Like, amen. Did you, question, when you got into that, when you realized that there was this link that was missing, did you think to yourself, it's more common in women, or did you just think it must just be a thing across the board? Because obviously it is, emotional eating is a lot more common in women. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, on face value, I would say yes. And I think the reason for that is, well, twofold. One, women are more comfortable expressing emotion, but equally, women are usually the more busy household member. And what I mean by that is that they have more stresses, more inputs. They're looking after the kids, trying to have a career. And, and in this modern day feminist world, it's like, women went from being mums and housewives to being both of those, plus having an amazing career, plus having all of these other things that, the modern woman is quote unquote meant to have, right? And so they're also under, I would argue, a lot more stress in a variety of different ways. Maybe not in the bucket. Maybe men and women have a bucket that's full of the same amount of stress, but I would argue that women have more inputs. Generally, and they're more comfortable being honest about their feelings in general. Like, a lot of men are sort of like, oh no, I don't want to talk about that, or emotional eating, that's for women, yet you go to a trade site these days and it's pretty hard to find somebody that's in shape. It used to be that tradies and laborers and builders were, they were pinnacle of they were fit, strong, they looked good. And there's like, if you go into the dating world, like the hot tradie was a thing, right?
Yeah.
It was totally a thing. Whereas now you go to those job sites and most of them have beer bellies, and they're eating terrible food. And there's multiple reasons as to why. But I think the reason that it's crept into being a major thing for men as well is simply access. Like,
Mm.
once upon a time it was like the pub and just get on with it. They were the two outlets. But women have always talked and communicated and, expressed their challenges or vented to at least to one another for the most part. Maybe not to their husbands or male partners, but at least to one another. So I think it shows up more obviously in women, but it's still definitely a problem for men too.
Mm. My husband is a tradie, and he had said to me that sometimes the guys make fun of him when he brings
Mhm.
homemade food.
Really?
And I thought, that is so sad that
Yeah.
you can't bring home, like you can't bring to work homemade wholesome food, right? And because I cook really clean and most of it's organic whenever I have access to organic produce, but it's always some kind of clean food. And I think that even when he was sick, when we first started dating, I used to, he would take medications. And I'm that kind of person who, if I feel like I'm getting sick, I don't take medications. I put ginger and turmeric and cinnamon in my water and I drink that all day long. And that
Mhm.
makes me better. And so I remember the first time he was sick and I was made him a bottle and he took it to work. They're like, "What the hell is in your water?" And they started making fun of him because of that. And so I think he's a bit like, I kind of have to eat in secret. But I can so get that because a lot of the time I had never even thought, I looking at job sites and they are quite large. A lot of them are smoking. A lot of
Yeah.
them, whenever they get off, as soon as they get off work, they go drinking. Like it's really depressing if you think about it. So for the people who are listening, who
Mhm.
enjoy a really good diagnosis like me, how would you define emotional eating and what are the signs that a person might have an emotionally driven behavioral pattern around food?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the answer is quite simple. It's eating for any other reason than biological requirement. It's
Okay, yeah.
it's really easy. So if you're eating when you're not that hungry, if you're boredom eating, if you're stress eating, if you get to the end of the day and you're like, oh, it's wine o'clock, uh,
Yeah.
the body rarely nutritionally requires wine, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so if you've got any of these indicators that are suggesting that you move towards food in the absence of hunger, or dehydration, then any of that could be classified as emotional eating, whether it's for good emotions, poor emotions, sad emotions, heavy emotions, because we can have cake when we're sad, when we can have cake at a birthday, which is great, which
Mm.
introduces that idea of like, when is emotional eating good and when is emotional eating bad, because it's not always bad either. And I'm not one of those people that are saying that you should never emotionally eat and you should always be rigid and stick to this plan and that's the answer forever, because that's ridiculous and nobody ever sticks to a plan forever. And there's only one David Goggins and none of us need to be like him because he's got
He's a
all sorts of
lot,
other
isn't he?
problems. Yeah, right. And so
Yeah, he's
so yeah,
so intense.
basically eating for any other reason than biological requirement.
Right. So then, like, do we have to give up bread all the time? And it's funny because I used to not eat bread. I used to not eat any of these things. And 3 years ago, I used to not even eat meat. And I mean, like your partner, I was a vegetarian and, well, let's say pescatarian. I ate calamaris because lentils didn't agree with me. And everything vegetarian is either lentil based or bean based. And I'm like, I'm not into beans. So I used to eat calamari when I used to go out. Right. And
Hmm.
so it was like my safe plate of food. But in 2021, I started to really crave red meat.
Mm.
And then that kind of brought in all the other things. I mean, my husband's Italian, which means that pasta, bread, cheese, all of those things came back into my life. And now I'm like, I don't really want to let go of them because it's easy. It's easy to throw together a sandwich, Maddie. And so when you
Hmm.
think of what you are helping people with, what are their greatest excuses for not following a healthier lifestyle or what they might be sabotaging themselves with? What are the blockages that you come across most often?
Yeah, it's a good question. Firstly, just to go back to your thing about not eating the bread, do I have to not eat the bread ever again? So, quick answer to that one. One is, if it causes you physical discomfort and you think your
Mm,
life would be better without it, then my recommendation would be let's try. But I've never given anybody a prescription of never eat this or never eat
mm,
that, because the second that we introduce hard, rigid boundaries, we trigger rebellious psychology. So whatever things in our life that piss us off and make us angry, or whatever trauma we had as a kid, often the way that we release that energy of rebelling against the perpetrator or the whoever, the
Mm.
boss, the teacher, the narcissistic partner, whatever, the way we do that in a really easy, safe way where nobody gets hurt is we rebel against our food rules, right? And so we express that. And so the second that you have some authoritarian, nutritionist come along and say, you can't eat this, your inner child, after a few days or even instantly, is like, you know what, Matty? I'm going to do what I want because I'm an adult now. And
Yeah.
then you dive headfirst into pizza, pasta, bread rolls, all of it, right? And then
Yeah.
this is the yo-yo diet cycle because nobody works with their psychology. They get given a framework that says do's and don'ts, and they
Mm.
rebel against the don'ts, and then they're back where they started, So anyway, that was a short answer to that. But I the common excuses or reasons people give for not eating the right way is because a lot of the people that I work with on the front, they just want to lose weight, right?
Mm.
And they just want to be healthier, to be better. It's very rare that somebody reaches out and says, I've spent a lot of time with my psychology and I've got an inner rebel that I need help with. Like, nobody says that, right?
Yeah.
And so on the front, a lot of people are just like, I want to lose weight. I've been yo-yo dieting for years. Nothing works for me. That's easily the most common thing that I hear. Nothing works for me, right? Or I can't stick to anything. I don't have enough willpower. And so these are all stories and ideas that these people have adopted through life experience. And also to acknowledge that the diet and nutrition industry is very extreme in a lot of ways. Most diets we sign up to cut out food groups, or they calorie restrict to the point that you want to binge eat because you're not getting enough nutrition in. And so I think the other thing is too busy with kids. Like, kids, life, work, everything is way too busy. And that's fair. And I'm about to find out about that.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's only in the last 2 generations that humans have been ever too busy or that food has lacked importance. And so it's not that long ago that actually mealtime was important, and it took hours every day, and the preparation and everyone that was home, if the kids were home, they were involved in the food prep. So it wasn't that long ago that it was normal to be able to spend time with food, to prioritize it, to pick the stuff out of the garden, or make sure that you spent time on a Saturday or a Sunday going down to source good food, because we've got to eat. It's who we are. It's our bodies. It's our mind, our psychology that's built on the molecules that we put in. And now, through advertising and marketing, we've been convinced, hey, it doesn't matter. You can just pour this in a cup and it's ready in 5 seconds. Cooking, who wants to cook? So boring, right? And so I think the idea that being too busy, I think that's a narrative that's slipped in through marketing and advertising of food companies and fast food and that kind of stuff. So I don't think it's that hard to actually go back to prioritizing food. And that's a big part of what we do for people is food is important. Food matters. It shouldn't be last on your list. The reason you feel the way you feel is because of food. And unless we prioritize it or make it a level of importance in your life that matters each day and to your kids, you're just going to produce the same outcome in your kids. Probably worse because they started younger.
There's something to be said for the glorification of being busy. I feel like a lot of people wear it as a badge of honor, and I am so tired of that. It's not cool to be busy. And I really think that people don't consider the fact that it's not that you're busy, it's just not something that you value. And whether it's not a value for you to eat healthily, or it's you don't value yourself enough to eat well. What are some of the things that you do notice about the clients that come to you? Are they lacking in self-worth and, confidence or anything like that? Do you notice things like that at all?
100%. Most of the people that we see feel unworthy of good things, or
Mm.
undeserving of good things. And that includes like being healthy, being in a body that's a slightly smaller weight or a lower weight. And we often see this related to childhood trauma and particularly sexual trauma, because there was an event, and it might even be not even childhood, but just awful things that happened as an adult, a situation which galvanized a belief system within you that you are not worthy of good things. And that could mean all sorts of different things in different contexts. But when it comes to respecting your own physical time and space that you sort of take up in the world, a lot of people will end up on this self-sabotage cycle of losing a bit of weight or getting healthier or building a better relationship with food and then going back, and usually even worse. And the reason for that is because, again, they haven't gone to this emotional level of healing the reason that they wish to stay in that body. Because we only ever do things when we sort of prioritize the benefits over the drawbacks. So every decision that we ever make has drawbacks and it has benefits. And if you ask somebody, what are the benefits to your alcoholism, or what are the benefits to you being 175 kilos or 300 pounds? Most people will say, oh, well, I know it's not good. But to their psychology, there are benefits, and they might not have dug deep enough to uncover them. But one, which is, a lot of women listening might be able to relate to after I say it, one of them is that in a bigger body, I am invisible to men. And an awful thing happened to me, or many awful things happened to me when I was young. That means that I wish to be invisible to men, because being visible to men is dangerous and scary and a threat to my survival. And so this is another thing that people will say, oh, I'm a self-sabotager. I always give up on myself. But we dig a bit deeper, and actually staying 170 kilos is a protection mechanism from some awful things that happened one time. Right. And so we've got to excavate the psychology, one layer at a time. And the answer isn't always at the core. Some people peel back 2 layers and they feel like, whoa, even though this awful thing happened, I just didn't attach that many stories to it. I've done a little bit of healing and I'm great. Whereas some people, we need to go really, really deep, to do some healing and some excavating and some understanding. And even in the step of understanding of, oh, that's why I am the way I am, that's so awakening to what's now possible once I heal that part, rather than staying superficial and on the surface and just blaming yourself for loving chocolate, and being like, oh, I just love chocolate. I'm just a chocoholic. We pull a few layers back, and actually if we do some healing, the chocolate has far less pull over us, or we have less of a desire to go towards these dopamine, pleasure seeking foods that mask whatever's really going on.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, there are certain things that can happen in our lives that can be considered as trauma. They don't necessarily have to be like major sexual assault type trauma. It could be any level of trauma, no matter how little. But we use that as a protective mechanism to like safeguard ourselves from however we felt in that moment where we experienced that really unpleasant feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether we gain weight or not is neither here nor there. It's that we use food as a mask, or to
Mm.
distract ourselves from sitting with the feeling or sitting with the memory. And I've done that in my own life. That's why I know how to do this work, because I had a bit of trauma growing up. And as an adult, I eventually realized that every time I had those memories or thoughts come up, I would just eat copious amounts of sugar. So, that I would get to a point where I would numb out, like an alcoholic would get drunk to not feel or deal with reality. I would do the same thing with pizza and lollies and candy and carbohydrates, and so although I never really had a weight issue, I definitely had an emotional regulation issue with not being able to sit with things that were haunting me, for a lot of my life. And one of the hardest things to make sense, because our psychology, the way our brain works, is our brain can't determine the difference between perceived and real. All it knows is information, right? So if we remember something, or we think about something that happened, or even think about something that has never happened, all the brain is interpreting is the chemicals that run along our neurons, the electrical impulses that run around our brain. It doesn't know outside of the physical body whether it's happening or not. And so this is why our thoughts are so important and so powerful. And equally, our memories can be so debilitating, because the brain and the body responds as if it is happening today, right now. Every time we think about it, every time we go through it, which is then tricky, because it's like, Matty, how do I not think about things that I'm thinking about that are in my
Yeah.
head, right? And this is the whole process we go on, learning to navigate our feelings, learning to navigate our thoughts, learning how to process them, learning how to release them, learning how to package them up safely within us so they're not running out of control in the chocolate aisle of the supermarket, or at, the alcohol aisle in the supermarket, whatever it might be. But But yeah, the idea is that we often use these foods as a distraction, as a coping mechanism, which isn't saying that they're not delicious. And from time to time, they're fabulous to eat, but it's the frequency that we do these things and whether that frequency is helpful or harmful.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for the marriage of bread and cheese. Like, if my last meal was not a pizza, and I mean, I don't li it's probably the cheese more than anything for me, and it's interesting as you were talking, it brought up a conversation I had with my older sister recently. My niece was, for Halloween, there's apparently some character, and all the young girls are dressing like her at the moment, and she was dressed that way for Halloween, and for me, I'm not a mum to humans, but to me, it was a little too provocative. It made me feel a little uncomfortable. And
Mhm,
my sister's like, "Oh, you were the same when you were younger." I was like, "Actually, no, I wasn't. I have photo evidence. I used to take photos all the time, Maddie. So, and I used to work at nightclubs. So I never really went clubbing. I was always working on the door. And
mhm,
so and she's like, "You used to dress the same." I was like, "Actually, I have photos of almost every night out that, I've ever had, and I never felt comfortable in my body. So I never dressed that way. And I know that to be true because till this day, I struggle with that. And, your partner's pregnant and I'm at a place where I want children, and one of the things that scares me the most, it's not even about the baby, it's about how much my body's going to change. And
mm,
all I can hear in the back of my mind, and I got a little bit emotional while you were talking and saying, when you remember memories, they your body relives it. And my grandmother, Maddie, used to be the kind of woman who she didn't say, "Hey, how are you?" really lovingly and give me a hug. It was, "Oh, you've put on weight.
mm,
Oh, why aren't you eating? Are you starving yourself?" And so it's like, well, should I not be eating this? Should I not be losing weight? Because every time you see me, all you do is talk about my weight.
yeah,
And it's not necessarily that I was fat, but as an ethnic girl growing up in the northern beaches of Sydney, I was very curvaceous for a young woman, and the rest of the girls were not. And so I stuck out like a sore thumb. And so
mhm,
that has stayed with me forever. And so I'm aware of those things. And whenever they come up, I'm like, no, it's okay. You're just experiencing that feeling again. However, I can't help but eat while I think or eat when I'm bored. And I'm like,
mhm.
oh, it's 1 o'clock. I should probably eat because if I don't, I'm going to get hungry later. And we don't want that because I might be in the middle of something. And so when you think about these thought processes and the clients that come to you, how do you help them to address those mental, because they're clearly like your brain wires and fires in a certain way. And when it does that multiple times, it becomes it becomes a pattern. How
Yeah.
do you work with reworking that for people so that they do feel, free of those thoughts and can actually move on and successfully get healthy and fit and whatever else it is that they want?
Yeah, thanks for sharing part of your story there. That was, yeah, beautiful, and I appreciate the vulnerability. But it's similar to a lot of people that we work with. So many people, grew up with comments from mum or grandma or an auntie or a brother or a sister, and or they were in dance when they were like 7 or 8, and they were the bigger, curvier girl or the taller girl, and yeah, just these comments which were probably never intended to be malicious have just shaped the rest of their lives. And so I think in regards to the way that we help people navigate it, the first step is simply identifying, what do I feel when I eat? And some people respond to that with, I have no idea what I'm feeling, because just as
Mm.
you highlighted, over over time it becomes a habit, and so you end up disconnected from the actual emotion that drove you there to begin with. So if you started, let's say, emotional eating at 16 because you broke up with a boyfriend and you did the whole movie thing of ice cream on the couch, that typical scenario of he's dumped me and life is awful. After 45 years, you're not still thinking about that boyfriend, or it's unlikely that you are. You're just automatically going to the freezer every time that sort of anything remotely in the neighborhood of that feeling is triggered. And so by that point, you're simply just saying it's a habit. I've been stuck in this habit for, a long time. And so we have to actually kind of reverse that process mentally. We have to go back to a time where we did feel the emotion. And in the beginning, it'll be like, oh, I always find myself in the kitchen. Why? What's going on? Check in. Oh, I don't know. something's happening, and then you repeat that process for a couple of days, and you might be able to tap into, oh, I think I'm kind of angry. I don't know, maybe. And then you repeat it for a few more days, and we're just developing this self-awareness of a habit is only formed because it performs a level of convenience for our biology that is better than the alternative. So, what is the convenience? And you could just simply say on the surface, well, I can go to the pantry or the fridge and the food's there, amazing, that's convenient. But if we go to our body and our mind, what is this convenient? Why is this convenient for our body or our mind? Oh, because dealing with the thing is way harder than actually just eating the food, right? So it gives a whole new perspective to convenience food or fast food, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm bypassing a system that is in my body already. And so once we sort of get people self-aware enough to be like, oh, I think these are the feelings, then we start figuring out a process for dealing with those feelings in a healthy and safe way in small bite-sized amounts, because it's not jump in day one, tell your trauma story and then feel amazing, because if you do that, usually people have massive vulnerability hangovers and so much shame and so much embarrassment comes up that they just totally derail themselves, and sure, 12-step programs and getting off stuff instantly works for some people, but even people in 12-step programs that give up stuff completely overnight, often they've tried 15 or 20 times to do that, right? Before they've actually built the muscle of being able. So we try and start with building that muscle of being able instead of just going extreme. I just build the self-awareness. What is it? When we know what it is, sometimes we don't even need to tap into what caused it. Sometimes it's just, oh, I'm angry. Anger comes up. What's a healthy way we can deal with anger? Maybe it's working out. Maybe it's breath work. Maybe it's journaling. Maybe it's punching a pillow, and that can actually be enough for some people as their outlet now that they can identify a feeling, identify an outlet, and then that system just runs, for the rest of their lives, ideally. But then we go on to the other emotions, right? Because we all feel all of them. It's like, when I'm sad, what do I do? When I'm happy, what do I do? Instead of just all feelings equal chocolate, right?
Does that mean then that this work can help people who have other types of addictions, like smoking?
I mean, I think so, because I often say the way that we do anything is the way that we do everything. And
Mm.
so, although I frame this around food, a lot of our testimonials and reviews are people saying this helped the way that I parent, this helped fix my relationship. I made some decisions about my mother-in-law, is very bad for me. It helps people put boundaries in place and have healthier thinking for themselves at work, in relationships, in family, not just food. So once people start respecting themselves, it's not just around food that they respect themselves. They apply that to all contexts. So yeah, we've had a lot of people that have challenges with alcohol as an adjunct to the food thing, because often one leads to the other. And so yeah, a lot of people that have been able to either really reduce their alcohol consumption or even give up alcohol entirely. And we've got multiple people that have been in, 3 years alcohol free, 5 years alcohol free. It's not something we advertise or intend to do. It's just a byproduct of them doing that inner work.
Yeah, and it's such a social thing, right? Drinking. I know so many people over the years who have said, "Oh, I only smoke when I drink.
Yeah.
I only smoke socially. I only drink socially." And I'm like, well, do you consider that there may be a reason why you participate in those behaviors only when you're around other people? Is it because you need to feel like you fit in, or that alcohol makes you more friendly and more confident? Like, what are those things? And so that's why I ask about the other things. I know that my mum, it's been a smoker her whole life, but she always says, "It's all I have, leave me alone," when she
Mm,
thinks of quitting. And I'm like, what
mhm.
do you mean it's all you have? Like,
Yeah.
cancer in a stick is all you've got. Like, and I can never understand it. I have not yet identified an addictive behavior that
Mhm.
is unhealthy for my body. When I say that, I go and eat things when I'm thinking or when I'm bored, it's, like we've spoken offline, it's pistachios. So it's not like I reach for junky food, but I
Mhm.
probably eat double the amount of pistachios I'm meant to eat in a sitting, because I'm like, it's healthy for me. It doesn't matter. It doesn't, it's nuts.
I think it's super
Um,
common, that thing that your mum said, though, because in this, like we talked about earlier, is that we're so busy, and women particularly, but
mm,
everybody is so busy and giving their kids 24 different sports to go to a week and all of this stuff, that a lot of people struggle to break up with the smoking or the alcohol or the food, or the Netflix even. I have a lot of clients that, need to put boundaries in place with screens, because finally, once the kids have gone to bed and hubby's gone to bed, me time exists. And that's between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, which is dreadful for sugar cravings the next day, right?
Yeah.
And for the remaining days to come. And if they're doing that every day, and I think that's there's a couple of failings there in regards to society, because it's like, you're a mum now, and Yarly and I have been hearing this kind of narrative. There's 50-50, right? We've got 50% of friends that are like, enjoy it, remember, you're in control of the kid, don't let the kid control you, still live your normal lives, take the kid to parties. Then the other 50% of people are like, it's over, you're done, nobody cares about you anymore. And this is a narrative that's in society. It's over. You're
Yeah.
not important anymore, especially women that are mothers. Like, you do not matter. Self-sacrifice to the nth degree in every possible way. So wine whilst you're doing the washing, or chocolate whilst you're doing the washing, or cigarette while you're doing the washing is all you have if you live and believe that narrative.
Gosh. On the topic of busy, and I mean, we're at a time of year where everyone's making the very predictable, I'm going to get fit in the new year resolution.
Yeah.
It must be a very busy time for you early on in every year. But I've heard that a lot of people give up on their goals within a month,
Mm-hmm.
or within at least the 2 months. What do you think is happening after that month? Is it that they're on like I've got this health vibe going on, and they're like, well, I just give up, because they're not really changing the psychology around it? Like, is there something that people can really be like, get to that month of their, I'm going to get fit high and keep it going?
Yeah, I think there's a few factors that play into that. One is the illusion of time. So usually
Mm.
in late December, early January, we have a break from work, or life slows down a bit, and we're in this like, oh, I've got a bit of mental space, I could fit the next thing in. And this is why for many years we've actually focused on not starting until February, until people are actually back into their normal life routine, because that's when it needs to work. Not when you've got a bit of time and you're spacious and you're feeling abundant, like, yeah, now's the time. It's like, you need to be able to do it when all of your triggers are being triggered, when you're
Yeah.
tired, when nobody's watching. That's when the real success happens. It's like late at night, you're in front of the fridge, you're in front of the pantry. Nobody will know what you're about to do. And if you can manage yourself then, you've won, basically. That's the goal, right? So I think that one is the illusion of time. Two, December is the month that people gain more weight than they have all year. Or they put so much food in that they feel so inflamed or dysregulated that they're like, oh my God, this is so much worse than normal. I'm going to, give it a go. And then there's the pie in the sky idea, right? Because all of the marketing and advertising at this time of year on social media and everywhere about health and fitness is 28-day challenges and 10 kilos in 10 weeks and all of this short-term extreme stuff, that sounds great because it's like, oh, healthy, sexy me isn't far away. Like, I'm going to
Hot
get
girl summer.
totally hot girl summer. Let's take me back 25 years. Let's go,
Yeah.
And surely, people that have been doing that for 25 years have
Yeah.
done that enough years now to know that it actually might work, but it never lasts,
Mm.
And that's because it's often unsustainable. It often doesn't do the emotional mindset psychology work that we do. And I would argue that most people need that because we're in such a world of excess that everything is available at our fingertips always: coping mechanisms, distraction, procrastination, boredom, and all of that's robbing your life of healthy progress, but success, connection, all sorts of stuff. But it sounds unsexy, it's not. It's like I'm up here on a billboard saying, hey, you want to lose weight slowly and do deep, really hard work? Amazing. Who wants to do that, right?
Sign me up. Yeah, I'm ready to excavate my ugly emotions and, not eat the
Yeah.
foods that make me feel better. Totally.
Completely. And so people are, often the people that end up working with us have listened to the podcast for years, or they've been around on the yo-yo diet cycle enough times to be like, they're all right, I get it. I finally get it. I've got to do something deeper because my behavior is not changing. I still have this internal narrative of hating myself or saying really awful things. And so for that reason, we don't really work with young people and, sort of anyone under 40 because they just haven't been on the yo-yo cycle long enough to realize it's not the answer. And it might be for some people. Some people can make those extreme changes, but I think yeah, a lot of people, you only have to walk outside and look around, unfortunately, to see that most people, men and women, have been making poor choices for some time.
You brought up the social thing and advertising, and I feel like you and I would be on the same page in the sense that we know that advertising is a form of hypnosis.
Yeah.
And this is the time of year where you see a lot of that.
Hmm.
And I mean, we experienced a lot of it in 2021, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. There was a
Yep.
lot of that marketing campaign push to make you believe that what your instincts or your gut is telling you is not right. And when I think of my childhood, Maddie, when we first moved to Australia, even, I hardly ever saw people who were, you know, obese. I
Hmm.
hardly ever saw people who were overweight. And even in things like in movies or in, old, news reporting things that you see, everyone is quite slender. And so when I think of how much, society has changed, even in the, God, when did we move here? 1990. The I feel like my generation was like the last one that saw that there was something a little bit different. We saw like this narrow window and then we moved into what is socially acceptable now.
Hmm.
Whereas the ones who were, 1990s, 2000s, this is all they've known. The
Yeah.
takeaway, the fast food, a lot of people don't even know where their food comes from. Like, I recently did studies in food as medicine and the psychology of food. I'm so fascinated with herbal medicines and things like why we eat what we do
Hmm.
and when specifically, and little things like how cashews, where cashews come from. They literally come out of a flower bud.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that? A lot of people these days don't know where their food comes from, and that's kind of scary. So when they take up you know, new ways of eating, how do you take them from quick, easy to healthy food? That's also, I mean, healthy food can be quick and easy, but a lot of people just don't know how to make healthy food. They don't know what healthy food is. And a lot of
Yeah.
packaging says, low in fat, which stay away from anything that makes a claim on a packet. Like,
Yep.
stay away from anything that is that's in a packet. Like, for me, I'm like, if it has to, you know, um, prove a point on the front of the box, it's not true. So things like low in sugar, well, what's in the actual ingredient list? So when you deal with your clients, when you're working with them, how do you get them to get from a point of I'm eating a muesli bar out of a box because I think it's healthy to, I don't know, make the muesli bar yourself or switch it for something else? Because there's still going to be that period of time where they need, or at least they need to wean off that sugar addiction. Like anything, you need to wean off. I think if you cold turkey it, it's like you said, you're just going to kind of go back into the behavior unless is it individual. Do people sometimes some people better at cold turkeying or some people better with weaning? What are you kind of seeing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think romantically we all wish we could cold turkey because then
Yeah, good guy.
that healthy sexy body we all want isn't that far away because it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, extreme change, you know. Um, but at the same time, there's plenty of people that have made extreme changes and stunted their metabolism in the process because they've gone too extreme or too low calorie or too, whatever. But I think my belief is that pretty much everyone, unless you need like got a dire cancer diagnosis or you've got a serious diagnosis that's life threatening, I think most people benefit from weaning, going slowly. But I think as well, first and foremost, you need to actually want to be different.
Yeah.
That's really important because a lot of people are getting healthy or quote unquote skinny because they think they should, right?
Mm.
And if you think you should, and that you're basically doing stuff for other people, your inner rebel will come back and rebel against those people by not doing it, right?
Yeah.
So, firstly, you need to actually want to be better and not have people telling you should be. We actually had somebody come through our program at one point, and she, clinically speaking, would be considered overweight, but she got to a point where she realized she was doing it because she had married into a very fit, healthy marathon running family, and she constantly was made to feel like, the fat person in the family. And she realized,
Wow.
actually, I'm totally okay with what's going on with my body and my weight. And I think that's victory, irrelevant of what you look like. If you can totally know what's going on, know what you're putting in, know the consequences, and still say, this is who I want to be and I'm okay with it, then I was like, congratulations, all the best, you know? So, first and foremost, you need to want it. And then I guess second to that is we need to start changing your body, not just your mind, because your microbiome, so what all the gut bugs that live in your gastrointestinal tract, they are all a part of the conversation that happens in your head about sugar, not just sugar, but all of the unhealthy foods, right? And so we need to start rewiring your gut bugs to crave different food. And the way that I talk about it is that imagine all of these gut bugs are like crack addicts, and the only things that makes them happy is sugar. You're fighting against, so you'll do your mindset work, but you're fighting against physically billions and billions, an army of crack addicts. And
Yeah.
so just to visualize that, do you think you're going to win that war? Probably not. One of you, billions of crack addicts, right? That's an intense
Yeah.
fight. It's kind of like, the Matrix, where there's like Neo and millions of Agent Smith, right? It's that kind of scenario. But the idea is that we want to actually start converting the gut bugs before we even start to really try and eat healthy, because then we're getting our body on board as we do the mindset work. And I think of it as like a seesaw. If you just do the mindset work, you'll be fine a lot of the time. But the second that your body is hungry, or you haven't eaten in a while because of a certain situation, or stress is triggered, your body will override the mindset work that you've done, because you've got all of these crack addicts that want sugar, right? And then if you just do the physical, which is where most people have been for most of their lives, just doing the nutrition work, just doing the diet work, then the second that you have an emotion that runs a little bit over your willpower threshold, you're gone again, right? So we need to do
Yeah.
these kind of in tandem. And the good thing is that the way that we do the nutrition stuff, there's no calorie amount. We don't weigh people. We don't weigh food. We don't tell anybody they have to have certain amounts of percentages of anything. There's definitely a template that says, look, this is going to generally produce healthy blood sugar and healthy gut health in most people, but it's flexible in whichever way you need it to be. And so we want to create a life that's accessible and sustainable. We're like, oh yeah, I could cook that. That's fine. Or I'll be able to do that in a month. I'm not on this, this sort of in this pressure chamber of I'm on the 28-day thing and I'm going to do the cooking and it's going to take, less hours of sleep and lots of focus and lots of intensity. If that exists, you're not going to do it long term. It's not going to be here in 6 months, 5 years, or any of that. So we need to want to do it. We need to actually have something that's sustainable and accessible. Also something that's not repulsive to everybody else in your house. Because that's often what people say. I don't want to cook 3 or 5 meals every single day. And a lot of these fantastic diets that are good for your gut, good for your mental health, good for your body, good for weight loss, they take a lot of effort and a lot of work, right? And you can do a lot with a very small handful of spices and some very basic stuff that you can get from the supermarket. And there's 1 billion cookbooks on the planet, and probably more on other planets, because there's so many that have been written, that there's no shortage of accessing the information. It's just, a bit of encouragement to take the step and do it. And it takes some time, it takes some time to get into this rhythm. But the other thing that I think is important is a lot of people want to change their entire diet on day one, whereas we do all the mindset work first. So that's like, a couple of weeks, couple of months of work, depending on the person. And then we do just breakfast. Don't even worry about changing anything else. We're just going to change breakfast for the next few weeks. And then once we've kind of got a few options there that feel doable and normal and like, oh yeah, I could do these for a while. All right, now we're going to look at lunch. And it's this progressive change. And I kind of say 1 tweak a week. We want to change one thing at a time over time, so that it just slowly becomes normal. It's not just a huge life overhaul that happened overnight. That's like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know any of these foods. It all tastes a bit weird. Just take me back to the devil I know, because that felt way
Yeah.
safer.
God, there was so much in that I'm like, ding, ding, ding. My brain's like, thank you so much for acknowledging so many pieces in what you just said. One of the things that I love most about what you just said is that you're addressing one meal at a time. And as someone who's grown up in a household where, I have a mum who's literally been on a diet her whole life,
Mm-hmm.
and we were the guinea pigs with the recipes. She had this book, Maddie. It was called vinegar, garlic, and onion or something. And everything she made was vinegar, garlic, and onion. It was, some things were nice, but others were disgusting. So, I lived through that my whole adolescent years and as a teenager. And so this for me is like, oh, to be able to just address one meal at a time makes so much sense. So much sense. And I've instinctively, whenever I try to give up something, I try to give up, like, let's say I've over Christmas, which I don't generally, I'm actually pretty good over Christmas, but I love hot cross buns and I love a good, Kinder chocolate egg, not regular eggs, but just Kinder chocolate eggs.
Yeah.
So I'll give up like one thing, like I will give up chocolate, and then I will give up biscuit, and then I will give up chocolate, biscuit, and ice cream, and I just add one more thing to that list, and so I
Hmm.
gradually give those things up, and I'll do it. Like I said, I'm not big on eating these things. It's just certain times if you were like, I love hot cross buns, that I think to myself, you need to kind of curb that for yourself.
Hmm.
But I love that start with breakfast, because it can be really hard for people. Like I know so many people, Maddie, that just have a coffee in the morning
Mm.
and that sustains them until like 2 o'clock. And then
Yeah.
they'll eat something that's, whether it's healthy or not, it's probably a larger meal than you would normally have if you had had a really good breakfast. And I found that for me, eating a really decent breakfast at about 10 a.m. and then eating a late lunch about 2 to 3, and I'm good for the day. It's eating dinner that really affects me. And
Hmm.
so when you think of, the people that you're working with, and things like diet crazes like intermittent fasting, do
Hmm.
you get a lot of people that ask you about that? And what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's a lot in what you just shared as well, because the one meal at a time is also really useful application for willpower. Because a lot of
Mm,
people with that whole, I need to change my diet on day one and my whole life changes. There's this impending existential doom about that, which is I'm going to be different forever. I'm never going to
yeah.
have chocolate ever again, right? And nobody wants that thought. That's terrifying because chocolate's delicious, right? And so, with that idea of willpower or like just applying yourself, I encourage people to do that, like not even with the change of the meal, but with their intention. So, instead of being like, I'm not going to eat chocolate this week, it's like, okay, I'm hungry right now. It's lunchtime. I'm actually just going to do this lunch really, really healthily because I want to. I want to give it a go. I want to see what I can cook or what I can buy. And after lunch, all bets are off. We're just back to normal me, right? And so you have a healthy lunch and then the pressure's off again. You're like, oh, I survived. I survived one meal, and it was healthy and it was
Yeah.
delicious. And I actually kind of don't want the chocolate. And, if I want the chocolate, I'll have it later. And then you get to dinner and you're like, all right, am I going to go all in on being healthy at dinner? And so we break up this idea of this existential doom of never ever, again into literally 30-minute chunks that are so doable for everybody of like, oh yeah, I can survive the next 30 minutes. That's totally fine. So I think
That is like such pressure off. Like I
totally.
feel less pressure right now. Just listen. I was like, you know what? That's a really good way of looking at it. If I can just get through this meal, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, I love
So
that.
so I think that's one way to go about it. But I think as well with in regards to the way that I guess most people sort of start to navigate their boundaries around food or their changes around food. Um, I think intermittent fasting is one way to look at it, and that's actually what we include that in our programs. We include intermittent fasting. However, I have to qualify that it's not about starving yourself. It's not
Mm,
about getting a trophy because you fasted the longest. It's not anything like that. Traditionally, all that intermittent fasting is, which we all do every day, is a cycle between eating and not eating. So not everyone removes breakfast. Not everybody reduces down to one meal. Like it's about you. And what I would say is that most people that come through actually need to add a meal to their process because many of them are doing the coffee thing, which means that
mm.
by the end of the day, they're undercaloried, they're malnutritious, and the thing that leads to the sugar binge or the late night, I'm tired, I'm throwing caution to the wind, is I haven't eaten enough protein today or I haven't eaten enough nutrition in general today. And that's, a lot of people that bypass breakfast, they do it incorrectly because you can do it correctly if you're eating well the night before, you got good sleep, you know how to manage your stress, all sorts of different fancy intermittent fasting regimes can be very effective. But in the presence of, oh, I put coffee in and that'll I'll last on basically an adrenaline spike or a cortisol spike until the next meal. That's the wrong way to go about it. So I think intermittent fasting is good because most people that want to lose weight, be less inflamed, all of that kind of stuff, we do actually need to create space between particularly dinner and breakfast that's long enough that the blood sugar can go down, that your inflammation can actually be focused on by your immune system. Because a lot of people, they eat so frequently that their gut and the gastrointestinal tract, one, always requires resources and blood supply to operate, taking it away from other parts of the body. But we don't actually shift into that state of relaxation, rest, digest, and repair. Because, many of the people listening have probably heard there's rest and digest and there's fight and flight. And so if we're always eating, then our system never gets to the rest, digest, and repair phase because we're always on the go, got to wake up early, got to have coffee, got to have all these stimulants, go, 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 life is intense. And then we're not actually calming down. And like you said before, the hustle culture idea or the being busy idea also plays into not helping us rest, digest, and repair, which drives more hunger, which drives more cravings. So intermittent fasting used correctly for your situation can be a really good introduction to letting your nervous system calm down, actually digest the food properly, actually extract the nutrition properly, less cravings, all of that kind of stuff. And it exposes places where your emotions pop up because it's like, oh, normally I would eat my way through this part of the day where I feel like I can't be bothered or I hate spreadsheets or, my partner's annoying the shit out of me or the kids just bother me at this time every single day. And normally I just drink or eat or smoke my way through that. But actually now I've got space to actually be like, yeah, what's going on here? And this requires all of the other pieces we've talked about, working and operating effectively. But yeah, I think intermittent fasting is good. I think, when it comes to low calorie diets or extended water fasts or any stuff like that, that gets into risky territory. And you got to be guided correctly, or like most people, it's just bad for your psychology to be doing those. I can get everything I want in 3 days kind of things. It's like we said, one tweak a week, one meal at a time. We're figuring out the process or the cycle between eating and not eating that's right for you. And maybe that means breakfast at 7, maybe it means dinner at 4, maybe it means no breakfast. It's going to be different for everybody.
So then does that mean that you would challenge things like 6 small meals a day or juice fasts or full detox fasts? Like what was it that Beyonce did that fast really like years ago to prepare for that movie, the lemon, maple and cayenne pepper. Do
Yeah.
you challenge these?
Absolutely. They're so bad for your system. Juice cleansers are really bad for your gut health.
Wow.
Okay. They're really bad for your gut health because you're putting only liquid in, so your gut actually isn't doing any work to actually digest anything. 2, there's usually a lot of sugar because vegetables and fruit are carbohydrates, like exclusively, like 99.9% of them are carbohydrates / sugar, and so they're not bad to have from time to time or maybe even daily, but people that go on extended juice fasts often do damage to their gut health. Anyone who's only putting 2 or 3 ingredients like Beyonce into their gut is also doing big gut damage in that process. And equally, when we compare ourselves to these celebrities that are doing these wild diets, they literally have teams of dietitians, doctors, surgeons, personal trainers, everybody around them to get them back into tip-top shape. We don't all have those luxuries or the finance to be able to say, hey, I need all of these services at my house right now today, which is why, there's a bunch of documentaries where they look at elite athletes and it's like, hang on, these teams have $100 million budgets. You can't be comparing the busy mum with 3 kids to that kind of situation. But yeah, generally speaking, I would say that most of those things are short-term attempts to achieve what we all want long-term. And they repeatedly fail a lot of people because we go back to what we used to do because we haven't built the psychology of somebody that maintains a healthy diet or lifestyle and haven't dealt with the stuff that we use food to cover up.
Yeah. And then so let me ask you, I was recently listening to your podcast, How to Not Get Sick and Die. Loved it. I was listening to your episode with your significant other, Yali, who has been on this podcast. You're going to be a dad soon.
Yeah,
and
exciting.
What are you most excited about? The sleepless nights or
It's funny you say that because I've said to Yali multiple times through this journey, I really wish we were 22 and naive because I know too much about what we're going to lose.
Yeah, and you can't make it up, I hear, so that makes it really hard.
Yeah.
But I mean, Yali was experiencing some significant symptoms, I guess. She can't eat a lot of things. So when you think of all the things that are in the house, you had mentioned, you keep these kinds of foods out of the house on purpose. So how are you coping with your own wellness journey? Because it is lifelong, let's be honest. It's not just about getting to a place and then you stop. It's lifelong to be able to take care of your body. How are you dealing with, your wellness and health and what you're eating during your partner's, you know, symptoms, pregnancy symptoms that are also fun?
Yeah, she's been on a very wild ride. So, and I won't go into that because everybody can listen to the podcast if they would like. But yeah, it meant that her diet changed significantly. She basically didn't eat for the first 3 to 4 months of all of it, which was just insane levels of stress for me because I have a burden of knowledge of understanding science, biology, medicine, all of that stuff. And so I was not a fun person to be around for that time because I was worried about, what that meant for her through childbirth, what that meant for the kid, like all of these scary outcomes. And so, and then beyond that, some of the things that she was just starting to eat a little bit of were, yeah, really high sugar, you know, all the stuff that I basically say we should avoid this at all costs, and so our cupboard is sort of filled with all these sort of chocolates and lollies and biscuits and yeah, in the beginning I was like, whoa, I need to retrain myself a little bit because now
Yeah.
they're not very far away again. And part of my strategy for many years was just that the agreement I have with myself and one that works for some of our clients is that at home it just doesn't come into the house because it gets inhaled if it's in the house. But for me personally, if I'm out at brunch or I'm out at a dinner, I just agree that order what you want, enjoy yourself. That's sort of how I operate my life. And so, since I don't live at a brunch place, fortunately, that's only once a week, maybe twice a week. And that kind of is the cycle that works for me when I catch up with mates or whatever it might be. And then at home, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, it's like super clean. Whereas now it's like, oh my God, that food it lives here with me. So yeah, I kind of had to retrain myself and put up some new boundaries and do some new mental work to navigate my relationship that had kind of come back because, well, once upon a time it moved out and now it's just moved back in.
Yeah. And I mean, you've gone from being fully immersed into the world of Western medicine and like science and, that whole nutrition piece that comes from like a scientific background, and it no longer resonates with you. You guys have moved on to like a fully holistic way of being. I can't even imagine the when you're saying that, I feel panic
Yep.
because I'm like, if it was me in your shoes, or my partner probably wouldn't be as much of a stickler as I am when it comes to health. But if I started eating all those things because I couldn't stomach anything else, I would start to panic. And I'd be like, what am I doing to the baby? And I love that Yali called out, just because you might not be eating doesn't mean that you're doing harm to the baby. And I loved that because I think so many women worry about, oh my God, I'm not eating enough. And then
Mm.
other women are like, well, now I'm eating for two. They go to the other extreme. And so, do you find that many people come to you, after having children?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people, it's usually sort of 5, 6, 7 years later, though. They've been trying all the conventional ways of sort of post, birth weight loss processes and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, they're starting to think, oh, maybe there's something more to this. And I might have mentioned this already, but I don't necessarily believe everybody has some deep trauma. You get some
Mm,
practitioners that are like, everyone's traumatized, everything is a reaction to trauma. And some people, they just need the right system and they're like, oh, plug and play. Amazing. I feel better. They've got the results and that's fantastic. And sometimes it can be really little trauma, like just a repeated thing that your brother said over years, or a tone of voice that your mother used all of the time. It can be that accumulated over a life, and it actually doesn't need a huge excavation to uncover or heal. But yeah, no, I think, and the same, with Yali's journey, she's had to adapt to this idea of like, oh my God, this is how we're living right now. But I would argue that that's part of being personally developed and psychologically flexible is that you can understand that you need to adapt to a temporary situation because otherwise the stress and the stories about that situation just add to the problem. And that was me in the first few months. I was adding to the problem of the stress and the panic and the, feeling all sorts of weird emotions sort of towards Yali and being like, what are you doing? Force that stuff into your body, like this is a matter of life and death. And, after 8 years of vegetarianism, I just have too much knowledge in my head, and so I had to do some work to be able to separate myself from those fears, which still exist. They're just managed now, they're just, and any budding parent probably naturally has some level of fear for how that will all go. It's just that mine was a bit more like, oh my God, I have a podcast and a business and all of the books on the wall of our house are all about this,
So
So,
then I thought it was just Yali that was vegetarian. Were you also vegetarian?
no, not me, but
Oh, okay.
my knowledge of like where Yali's body is at and where health and nutrition and iron deficiencies and B12 deficiencies and all that
Yeah.
stuff, which showed up in blood results. Sort of, yeah, just too informed was the diagnosis for me there.
Yeah. And I don't blame you either. Like, it is so understandable that you would go into that mode, especially when you're, obviously protecting the person that you care about most, and soon to be a baby who you guys call Caramello, which I love, right? That whole conversation. For the listeners who want to, find out it, I will, put everything in the description of the episode, but go and listen to episode 400. It's with Matty and his partner Yali. They talk about their baby because they don't know the sex. You guys don't know the sex. And I love that you guys are not doing a reveal, this gender reveal party. Like, it's so cringy for me. But also the fact that you guys have such an honest conversation about something that probably makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, like about the skin color of your baby.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a
Which is
weird thing
crazy
because,
to me.
yeah. Well, you're allowed to talk about eye color. You're allowed to talk about hair color. Socially speaking, everybody wonders, like, oh, well, because for anybody wondering, Yali got a Sri Lankan background and she was born and raised in France, and so and then I'm white Aussie with a British Irish background, and so yeah, you're allowed to say, oh, will it have blonde hair? Will it have brown eyes? But the second you bring up skin, everyone's a bit like, oh, that's a bit. That's a bit. Are you a racist, Matty? You white privileged straight male with blue eyes? It's like, hang on, my partner's Sri Lankan.
Yeah, and she's like chocolate dipped goddess. Like, how
Yes.
can you expect that that you might produce a baby that's halfway?
Totally. So it's been funny just having those conversations with people and watching some people squirm a little bit and other people like, oh, interesting. And we've actually connected with a bunch of different people that have got, biracial children. And it's wild. We've, met somebody who's Botswanan, so she's a really black mum. And she married a Scottish guy and both kids, blue eyes, blonde hair, white skin. And it's like, and so Yali's humorously like, oh my God, I don't want to give birth to something pure white, because then it's like, did I steal this baby?
Yeah, you'd feel a little ripped off. I'm thinking that. I mean, both my husband and I were both olive skinned, but I would feel so ripped off if it came out super light. I mean,
Right.
I've got blonde hair, blue eyes, and light skin in my family. Both my sisters are quite fair, so there is the chance. And my nieces are snowflakes, Maddie. Like, their skin is so pure white, it's like milk, and their eyes are
Wow.
light. My brother-in-law's Irish, but the brown gene is quite strong, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and you were saying that in the podcast that you feel like it's going to come out with some strong brown hair, brown eye genes. But it'd be interesting to see. So when is your partner due? When do you get to be a dad?
Approximately the 19th of February. So,
Gosh, that is
yeah.
so close.
Shh.
Sorry to remind you that there's a baby coming. Didn't mean to. Yeah. Well, I mean,
It's coming so fast.
And given the time of year that you are, expecting, and what you do for work, and, what keeps you going, what is your North Star for, your business, your podcast? Why are you in this line of work? Why do you care so much?
That's a good question, and I guess there's the superficial answer and then the real excavated answer. And the superficial answer is that after working in hospitals and being down many, many rabbit holes that probably sound conspiratorial to people that have never heard this stuff before, is that, yeah, no, working in Western medicine was a big eye opener that the system is not designed for healing long term, for sustainable health and management of your own body. They like to subscribe people to long doses of medication, long periods of time where they're taking pills over and over and over again. And I'm not talking about seeing the GP for a temporary infection. I'm talking about managing your diabetes. I've had so many diabetics come through my program that have been with hospital dietitians for 30 years and
Ooh.
still not lost weight and still not, fixed their issues. And then in a very small amount of months have seen changes in their blood sugar and their weight that they've never seen before, and after working in the system and seeing that and being in conversations with pharmaceutical reps and seeing, helping run clinical trials that are in conjunction with Big Pharma, I'm like, I'm really passionate about it because I think for the most part we're being misled and lied to, maybe not directly by your practitioner, but the way that the scaffolding is created around the way we interact with medicine is that it's a money-making machine. And I'm not saying capitalism is the worst thing ever, because we're all out to make a dollar and be able to buy the things we want. But I think we need a system that incentivizes getting people truly healthy. And the sad thing is for Big Pharma is that means that their profit dries up. So the system needs to be redesigned, and I don't think it's in favor of human health and human optimization. And for that reason, I am very, very motivated because of all of those reasons. I'm working on the inside and seeing and hearing things that just are baffling, to most people, and including me, that I'm like, no, I'm going to be a part of the solution. It might be 0.1% of the solution, but that's that's what motivates me. And I guess my rebellion, the deeper answer to all of that is that the trauma that I experienced as a kid, all of this as an adult is basically an expression of the rebellion against my mother.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you ask for somebody's why that runs a big company or is really successful, often there'll be the deeper layer is that they're fighting against, whatever thing happened to them or whatever thing that they were raised to believe is right or wrong. And so yeah, I had a very authoritarian, oppressive mother, violent mother, and so the little part of me, or the big part of me that wants to rebel and fight and is loud and will, get in the ring in defense of people and ethics and morals, is basically defending little Matty.
Yeah, but I feel like it's serving you really well.
Completely. And
Yeah.
that's a part of the work we do with people, is that we all have an inner rebel and we can't pretend that we can make, little Chanel or little Maddie sit down in the corner quietly. We need an
Yeah.
outlet for that part of ourselves. And if we don't release it in a healthy way, it comes out in a destructive way.
Yeah, and one of the things that you had mentioned, that capitalist paste, I feel like there are some industries that capitalism profits should not exist. And for me, that's government
Hmm.
and health. And right now, they are so deeply intertwined that I worry for future generations what that will mean, because I see people in my own life who, have long term illnesses, like real diseases that could probably have been addressed had they taken care of themselves a little bit more or become a little bit more knowledgeable. But there's so many people who just don't know where to start, or they've been seeing their GP for 20, 30 years and they trust this person, but this person is also getting some crazy kickbacks for all the medicines that they give you for those 20,
Yeah.
30 years. Things like blood pressure tablets, Maddie. Like I can't even, my sister, I probably talk about my family too much on this podcast, but and she'll probably hate me for this. But, you know, her doctor is like, you might need to go on blood pressure tablets. My sister's
Hmm.
in her early 40s. I'm like,
Yeah.
what kind
Wow.
of a doctor? Granted, she's decided that she's going to try and do it through diet, which I'm so proud of her for.
Great.
And she's changed her diet and, she's cooking better for her and her family and everyone's involved. But when I think of just how many doctors just subscribe to prescription writing rather
Mm.
than what you do, where you're literally you're helping people change the way they think about themselves. You're helping people rewire their behavioral patterns and, make choices in their lives that actually serve them long
Hmm.
term. It kind of makes me think, yes, changing your lifestyle or changing one meal at a time, going organic, washing your food and choosing, foods that nourish rather than draw out the nourishment from your body. It can be expensive now, but at what cost later? Because once you
Yeah.
get into that medical system, and look, this has been how I felt for 30 years. I can finally talk about it openly. I feel like a lot of people woke up over 2021.
Yep.
And I'm like, I finally get to talk to my people about this stuff. I've felt this way for so long. But I saw at a very young age that it is very much a revolving door, and there really isn't a desire to help. There are wonderful people that work within the system, wonderful nurses. I've come across amazing women and men, in emergency care, for instance, and I've come across some horrible ones. But there are some great people that work within the system, but it's the system itself
Yeah.
that relies on, depends on, feeds their family on the fact that you are sick for the rest of your life, or you have some low-level immune disorder even that keeps them ticking over in terms of, even things like, cosmetic surgeries. Surgeries are what keep hospitals alive.
Yeah.
So if there was no surgeries, what would we do with a hospital?
Right.
So it really makes you think about, I hate to use the word agenda because it's been so, overused the last few years, but why the very obvious intentional desire to keep people out of their most well selves
Mm.
and to rely on things outside of themselves to validate how they feel. And, there's that whole, I'd love to get your thoughts on the whole positive body movement when it comes to people who are extremely obese and
Mm.
what that is doing to people's psychology.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in what you just said that I would love
Mm.
to unpack, and I think we could do about 5 podcasts on,
Yeah. And we might have to,
2020,
Maddie.
2021. Hey, I'm up
Yeah.
for it. I'm up
Yeah.
for it. And it's funny too, because in that time, where everybody woke up in those couple of years of lockdowns and craziness and whatever, um, I I was kind of a bit ready for it because I'd been down the rabbit hole already for several years with cancer and dissecting all of this kind of stuff. And funnily enough, my first job out of uni was as a vaccine formulation scientist. So I already had,
Can't even imagine that, Maddie.
yeah, I had
Can't imagine you doing that.
lots of insight all of this was informing my decisions that exist now, right? All of these little learnings, but body positivity. So I am not a fan at all of this, right? So, and some people might be like, oh, here we go, another privileged male that doesn't have any issues. Women have lots of different body types, right? More than men, and curvy and tall and skinny and big boobs and big butt and all of these things that occur naturally, right? Without any terrible food intervention whatsoever. But healthy at every size is a lie. Worthy at every size? Totally. Happy at every size? 100%. Deserving at every size, lovable at every size, all believe that they're true. Healthy at every size? No, that is not the case. There is a weight for everyone, or a body composition for everyone that might vary, that leads you to be unhealthy to the point that you are. And some people would say, hey, Matty, it's none of your business. I can do whatever I want with my body. And it's like, sure, okay. Well, in that case, I should pay a proportional level of tax to the health system in order for the amount that I use it. So my tax is now going towards, 1 million people that preach body positivity that are actually severely obese with diabetes that I'm helping fund the insulin injections. So it's a multi-layered conversation, right? And so that's where I think my opinion or voice and everybody's opinion or voice does matter, because we all pay tax, right?
Yeah.
So as I said, for like the individual that was in my program, power to her. It's like, if you get to a place where you're like, this is who I am, I'm okay with it, it is what it is, I know the food that I eat isn't amazing, but I'm happy. I'm like, okay, awesome, great. But to promote, and these celebrities and social media personalities that are influencing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to just accept themselves the way they are, there's living in denial, and then there's accepting yourself, right? And one of them is informed by laziness, which is that I'm not going to do anything about this. I don't have to, I'm a woman, I'm empowered. blah blah blah, insert all of the reasons as to why I don't have to actually work hard. And I think that's hugely detrimental. And I did a podcast where in the title was fat celebrities and why they're responsible for obesity. And
Mm.
Lizzo was very proud about her obesity, and she had to fire her dancers, which were overweight, because they couldn't move in the right way or keep up with the fitness requirements. The irony right there. So I'm not a fan of healthy at every size movement, because whilst there are many body types, and one composition could be healthy for one person, and that same composition could be really overweight for somebody else because of those different things, I think that, yeah, it's a bad thing to promote, and it's not good for young girls to think that, oh, I can just be overweight, or unhealthy or unwell, and that be okay, because I think that's a bad thing for society as a whole. The more we start accepting people for being less than they could be, is just the beginning of the overall deterioration of Western civilization.
Yeah, that's a really interesting comment that you make there, because if you think about it, back in the days, people would pull you up a lot more than they do now. And it's almost like you can't pull anyone up anymore. You can't say anything to anyone anymore. But I also think to myself, a lot of the young boys, even the adults right now who are like, I can do whatever I can eat whatever I want, and then I can just get Ozempic.
Yeah.
It's a whole, you know, the look, I don't like to say lazy, but it is really lazy. Like, you know what you need to do to get healthy. And if you're not willing to look into what that shot is doing to you,
Mm.
to your microbiome, to all of your cells, it's not helping you in changing your behaviors. And the moment you take that shot, yeah, you might get skinny, but as soon as you stop, you put the weight back on because none of your behaviors have changed. So that
Yeah.
easy way out is such a part of our society at the moment that I really, I've said this a couple of times now. I feel like I'm really dark and gloomy about the future, but I do really worry about the next generation, because I think you're in your 40s, right, Maddie?
I wish.
What do
I'm
you mean?
35.
Oh, I was like, if you tell me you're 50, I'm going to fall off my chair. Okay. But I still feel like you're in that generation that saw how it was before.
I definitely was. And I grew up with parents that had a veggie garden and a little orchard out the back, and still grow out of the same veggie garden. So yeah, I remember those days where nobody really had cancer. It was very rare.
Yeah.
Nobody was really overweight. That seemed to be rare. Yeah, I remember that portion of my life. And then it probably wasn't until I was at uni that I started to really see the shift. So sort of around 20.
Yeah. But I mean, you speak like someone who's been around a long time. Like, there's a lot of wisdom in that noggin. So much wisdom. That's why I was like, surely you're in your 40s. You've done a few around the sun. Like, but
Yeah,
yeah,
no.
it's crazy.
Yeah,
It's
it
so
is.
crazy. Yeah. And look, normally I would ask my guests what they love about being a woman, but it's totally not relevant today. So I've been thinking about how I go about asking that of, my male guests. And one of the things that I've realized through this podcast, Maddie, is that when I do ask that question, a lot of the time people answer what they really love about themselves, and about the people they care most about. So that to me has become such a bigger piece for me. And I'd love to know what you are most proud of about the man that you are today.
Oh, that's a deep question. Um, I think I'm most proud of my willingness to do the deep inner work, which is, much of what informs my programs, my services. It's, a lot of the best stuff that we do and create for people is not from a textbook. It's from my lived experience of sitting in front of therapists, sitting in front of the people that I've hurt, or the people that have hurt me, and having really hard conversations, and and trying to recover from some dreadful mistakes that I've made in my life that were what felt like life forming mistakes, and understanding why my motivations were there to do that, why I thought the terrible thing was better than the smart thing. A lot of the conversations that I'm able to have with myself. So I think, yeah, the thing I'm most proud of is just being able to go into all of that. And I didn't grow up in an emotionally intelligent family. I didn't grow up in an environment where they sat me down and were like, Maddie, what are you feeling? There was none of that stuff. I had to figure this out all through the desire of wanting to be a better partner for somebody that I was with for 9 years a long time ago. And it wasn't, and that's why I say the first thing that you need to want with your health is you need to want it. Because, you can go to all the therapies in the world, all the seminars, read all the books. But if you're doing it to just impress a bunch of people that are into personal development or to satisfy somebody who's watching you, then it's not going to work because, the cracks will show if you're not embodying it by sitting down and saying hard shit or sitting down and looking at yourself and saying, there's a lot of me that sucks, that's awful, that needs to change. And so, yeah, so that's my answer, my willingness to do that work.
And I acknowledge you for the courage, the persistence, the bravery, and the self-awareness that it would have taken for you to do those things. I think that you have to get to a certain place in life where you're just kind of sick of being in the life that you're in to really be like, what can I do differently? And recognize and acknowledge and admit that you are the source of everything in your life. And I love that to hear that from a man is so humbling and heartwarming and gives me hope for others that do listen, because that is the greatest work. I really think that that's what we're here to do. So
Yeah.
that I really think that's the biggest part of our purpose. It's not all the other things. It's that excavation work and the fact that you do that with your clients, the ripple effect that you would be causing, Manny. I'm obviously, well, you're totally coming back onto the podcast so we can talk about all other things. But I'm totally keeping an eye on what you're going to create in the world. And, obviously this has been so much fun and we're totally, like I said, going to do it again. And I was looking forward to this conversation so much and it did not disappoint. Please tell the listeners where they can find you and how they can work with you. Are you taking time off just out of curiosity?
No.
When Yali has, look at you.
Yeah, there'll be a little bit of time off when the baby comes, maybe a week or so. But mostly I work from home, so there'll be a lot of in and out kind of scenarios. And hopefully my parents will be around to help a lot because they've been very excited about this. So I'll take a little bit of time off, but I've got sort of team members and stuff that will be taking over. So from the outside, it'll look like it's still ticking away.
Well, where can they find you? Where can people find you and work with you?
Yeah, so I guess on Instagram, we're now the Real Weight Loss Coach, and the word real is all about the stuff we've talked about today. So you can find me on Instagram. And then the podcast is called How to Not Get Sick and Die. So just search that. Yeah, check out my episode with Yali, episode 400. And we're also on YouTube with both of those as well. So How to Not Get Sick and Die and the Real Weight Loss Coach, both on YouTube as well. So YouTube and Instagram are the main places. Or if you listen to your podcasts in audio, then Apple Podcasts and Spotify and those places as well.
Amazing. And if you are interested in connecting with Matty, I will include in the episode description and across socials links and ways you can do that. So if you haven't already, head on over to Spotify and Instagram and follow the Skin I'm In podcast to be the first to know when new episodes drop. Matty, thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Thank you so much as well. I appreciate you inviting me into this inner sanctum that was previously women only, and me being the first male. So I hope it sits nicely for everyone.
I'm sure it will. There was so much in this episode that I think that people can take and digest, whereas I find that a lot of people in the health and wellness space, it's very preachy and it's restrictive and it's, like you said, inner rebellion, that inner rebel. I can, feel it come up for me sometimes. And I'm like, you can't tell me what to do. So yeah totally. But we will have you back on, Matty. So yeah, until next time, guys. This episode with Matty brought up so many emotions for me. As someone who has struggled with body image issues and a lot of criticism as a young woman about my body, I can't help but think all of the women out there who, like me, have trauma around what our bodies should look like. As a preteen and a teenager, I was a 100-meter sprint champion. I was very fast on the track and I led the relay team as captain. Had I not become so self-aware about my body and the fact that it was developing and how desperately I wanted to hide it, I may have been an athlete today. Had it not been for the taunts from young boys who said things like boing, boing, boing because I had breasts and obviously they moved when I ran, or, the comments from my grandmother that I was talking about in the episode about my weight every time she saw me, or the constant reminder that I looked different from all the other girls in the dance group because the leotard didn't fit me in the same way and I needed a bigger leotard because I already had hips and I was developing breasts at like age 10. Had I not had all of those low level comments that ate away at my confidence, I may not have given up athletics, basketball, volleyball, and hockey because of the shame I felt about how my body was developing curves at such a young age in the era of waif thin models and the slender limbs of the Australian girls I grew up alongside on the northern beaches of Sydney in the 90s. It was really hard for me as a young girl, a young immigrant girl, let's say, who looked really different from everybody else. I didn't know how to fit in, and I didn't have the resources to know that it's okay to look different and that all our bodies are different and develop differently. As a woman now in her 40s, I'm acutely aware of how external factors affect my internal dialogue and how the movement of quick and easy piques even my interest as someone who would never take that route. Like I would never get a shot to lose weight. I just don't think that that makes any sense for the human body. My first point of call would be, what are the lifestyle changes that I need to make? What am I eating? What behaviors do I need to change that has gotten me to this point? And still, I think, gosh, it would be so much easier if I wasn't so committed to, finding ways to do things naturally. I love that Maddie called out the body positivity movement and acknowledged the difference between loving yourself and having self worth at every size and how that's a deserving place to be, but that healthy at every size isn't. And that doesn't only extend to those who are overweight, it's any extreme form of reaching a place where your body can no longer sustain healthy functioning and processes like anorexia, bulimia, and obesity. Just like with our cycles, our body goes through seasons and each season serves a purpose. We don't naturally eat less in summer because it's beach season and our body instinctively knows that it's bikini weather and we need to get prepared. What our body responds to is the Earth's cycle of death and rebirth and the seasons that make all of that possible. In the summer months, we gravitate towards foods that are fresh and sweet and light and cool us down because our body doesn't need as much energy to thrive and survive. We have the sun. Sunlight is so important for our thriving, guys, and so is earthing. And in the winter, we want warm foods, lush green vegetables, warm stewed meats, steamed broiled veggies, mugs filled with tea or hot cocoa, because these are the things that help keep us warm and nourished during a time where we don't have as much access to sunlight and, putting our feet on the ground outside. Think about it. Oranges are a winter fruit because they give us in the winter what the sun gives us in the summer. Back in the days, people ate with the seasons. These days, we live in a time where everything is available all year round, which is fantastic. But it means we have forgotten what our ancestors knew about food and how important that connection is with our body. Next time you reach for a pale pink watermelon in winter or an apple in summer, give some thought as to how long that fruit has been sitting in a storage container, perhaps frozen, and how long it's traveled and how far it's traveled, in what kind of conditions to get to the shelves of your grocery store. I mentioned in this episode my concern over the recent rise in easy to access medical interventions for weight loss and the implications it has on the future health of women who so desperately want to fit in and look a certain way because social media says this is what's normal or acceptable right now. Like I said, in the 90s when I grew up, being a stick figure was what was normal. Now, having a small waist, big breasts, and a big booty is what's in fashion. Set aside what social media is telling us women should look like. Can we just confront the fact that a lot of these easy, quick fixes come with horrible side effects? Have we become so obsessed with weight loss and fitting into an ideal body image that we've forgotten these decisions are made by suits sitting around a boardroom table, deciding what the next trend is and how they're going to manipulate us into believing this is our new normal? And for them, it means massive profits. It's literally what the beauty and cosmetic industry relies on to fatten up their profit margins while you whittle away yours, trying to pay for the latest injection or procedure that does harm to your hormones and natural bodily processes. You also put all the weight back on, by the way, because if you haven't changed the behavior that got you to where you don't feel comfortable in your body, then as soon as you stop taking the thing that's making you lose weight, all of that's coming back. So think about it. Is it really worth messing all of your systems in your body just to fit into a smaller size pair of jeans? I don't know, guys. There's also something to be said, right? For anyone who's listening to this episode, for anyone who's watching, there was a time where cigarettes were being endorsed by doctors. You heard me. Targeted ad campaigns made smoking cool and healthy. They called it torches of freedom for women. That's how they marketed it to us, guys. And that's why women started smoking, because before it was not appropriate for women to be smoking, especially in public. Some of you may have heard of the original influencer, Edward Bernays. And if you haven't, I highly suggest going down that rabbit hole, because it is his genius propaganda machine strategy that many companies use today to influence you out of making decisions that feel intuitively right for you, and replace them with decisions that line the pockets, wallets, and investment accounts of the mega rich who sit at the very top of the propaganda puppeteering food chain. If you are someone who wants to make a change this year to live a healthier lifestyle, and you want that change to stick, taking on Matty's advice of 1 meal at a time is really one of the best pieces of advice I have heard, because let's face it, it's overwhelming to make a huge dietary change suddenly. And with how socially acceptable it is to participate in restaurant and cafe culture, it's almost impossible to avoid eating foods that do more harm than good to our waistline, regardless of how yummy they are. Guilty is charged over here, by the way. I love going out for breakfast. And I mean, let's be real, my last meal, if ever I was on my deathbed, would be a wood-fired margarita pizza with oozy buffalo mozzarella melted all over it. So I can't talk. I have my own weaknesses too. But I also recognize that, there is a whole machine behind the system that ensures that we stay in these cycles. And food is addictive. And to break that addiction, it takes so much more than willpower. So if you're not, realizing your goals, it's not just your willpower. There is a whole food is addictive piece that a lot of people are not aware of. But if you are embarking on a lifestyle change and you want it to stick, I'm going to say it again, guys, do the mental and behavioral work. I say this all the time on the podcast. Nothing comes easy. Absolutely nothing. You have to put in the work. And every decision has a price. And that price is either one that will be the reason you live a long, happy, healthy life, or the reason your life is riddled with chronic illness, pain, and an ending that was sooner than you hoped it would be. So choose wisely and ask yourself, is this the most loving thing I can do for myself right now? Every single time you want to eat something that you know that you probably shouldn't. Maybe you'll change your mind. With gratitude and grace, have a wonderful day.